Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the May meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals. Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Tomato?
Here.
Commissioner Montani? Here. Commissioner Beck?
Here.
Commissioner Friedman?
Here.
Commissioner Allen? Here. Commissioner Goss?
Here.
Commissioner Klaus?
Here.
Councilmember Rogers? Here.
Okay, we have looking for a motion to approve the minutes for the meeting held in March. So moved.
Second.
Second, I believe.
Chair Tomato?
Aye.
Commissioner Montani? No. Yes, sorry. Commissioner Beck? Commissioner Friedman?
Yes.
Commissioner Allen? Here. Commissioner Goss?
Yes.
Commissioner Klaus?
Yes. Clerk, is there any correspondence?
None?
No. Okay, so we're moving on to new business. We have an applicant, Linda Allen, here to speak about the property located at 15 Maple Street. Who's here representing that property?
Linda Allen.
Okay, hello, Ms. Allen.
Hi.
Why don't you explain to us what you'd like to do?
Okay. The property consists of a large house and a carriage house, and it had the property, when we purchased it, when my husband and I purchased it in 1996, was 3-family, and so currently there's a rental in the carriage house, and then the house that I live in now is just one occupancy. So I'm trying to get it put back to the original 3-family. I never actually knew that it had changed its status, because when I get my tax bills, they always say the status is 3-family residency. So I'm just looking to have it put back. I have it's on the it's currently on the market. It's been on the market for a year. I had, and this is actually past tense, I had someone interested. They put an offer and they have since pulled it off because of some personal issues. But it is still on the market. And I just, people who look at it do not look at it in terms of a single-family residence, because it's just so darn big. So, and I've got plenty of parking. The main house has 2 furnaces. It essentially was an apartment house. So I'm just looking to have it put back to its original status.
Okay. Peter, do you have any questions for the applicant?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Mr. Bach, do you have any?
For clarification, when you bought the property, it was 3-family.
Yes.
You chose to go single-family in the main house?
Well, my husband and I, we had moved into the carriage house and then decided that open family plan living was not to our liking, so we moved to the big house. At that time, the apartment was sort of like the best location. It got all the sun, and my husband's family all lived overseas. They lived in Australia and Africa. When they came to visit, they came for long periods of time. So we just decided to not have it as an apartment, and I did let the code enforcement people know that we would just be owner occupying for a while. So it's just that I never knew the status change that I said, because the tax bills always indicated that it was a 3-family residence.
Your tax bills continue to show that.
Yes, I've got copies if you need them.
I'm good, thank you. I'm good.
Ashley, do you have any questions for the applicant?
Not at this time.
Jared?
Yes. Is it actually, so you're just living there, is it actually set up at this very moment to have 2 other families in the large house?
No,
So it's 1 kitchen?
yes. Yes,
That's all.
okay.
Fred, do you have any questions?
No, I do not.
Louisa?
Not at this time.
Okay. Is there anybody in the audience that has anything to speak about for this? I'd ask you to state your name and then address the board and where you live.
Julie Carney, 6 Maple and 44 Elm. I guess I'm confused because the card that we got said this wasn't for a summer or a short-term rental. Seeking use variance as a short-term rental. And now what I'm hearing is changing the property to be a multi-apartment.
Yeah, it's not short-term rental.
No, it's just our apologies. The public hearing still applies. I apologize, I gave you the wrong reason.
I got the same thing, Jim is coming at 25 Pine Street, and I got the same card as this lady in front here, and that's exactly what the card said. And,
We apologize, we entered that wrong, it's a clerical error.
well, that's not a problem. I don't see any trouble with what she wants to do. It doesn't seem to me as a problem. Actually, we need more people to have more spaces for things, because we're running out of space. There isn't enough housing available at the present time for those, and it's not affordable right now. So we need that space for that.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Elizabeth Powell, I live at 18 Maple Street, which is almost directly across. Kind of have mixed feelings about this one. Maybe I shouldn't, I'll probably tell my age by saying this, but my grandparents actually bought the house that I live in, 18 Maple Street, in 1924. So we've had a member of our family living in that home for almost 100 years. I know what that home was a long, long time ago, before there were any kind of apartments in it and before there was even a carriage house. So I've seen that property change. The problem that I have is that it isn't zoned right now. This is not a short term. Now, I know mistakes happen, but these, I don't know how many people these went out to, but somebody who received a card that said somebody was looking to use something as a short term is a whole lot different than somebody saying, we want to change the way that it's zoned so that it becomes a multifamily dwelling. So I have just one comment about that. The other thing is, if the house is not currently set up to be an apartment, there would have to be renovations done within it to create an apartment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Just please address the board.
Oh, okay, I just didn't know if that was what I heard, if I had heard that correctly. So it's another house that's going to become another apartment. Now, I understand there may be housing issues in the city, but so many of these big older homes have turned into apartment, sometimes not very well kept, or student dwellings, which, if you live in Center City, you know a lot of them haven't been. I would just hate to continue to see the city change the way these homes are zoned. That was a single-family home. 17 Maple next door to it was a single-family home. Where Robin Wood was a single-family home. So over time, all of these homes, and a lot of the homes in the city, have become, because of their size, have been changed to these multi-dwelling homes in use for a lot of various reasons, some of which really have had a very negative impact on those of us who continue to try to live in some of these Center City neighborhoods as a single-family residence. So I'm really concerned about, this sort of continuation of saying this house is way too big, so we gotta turn it into apartments, we gotta turn it into a student house. I have a sister whose granddaughter and her fiance, they're gonna be married in September, bought, some of you might know it, they bought the Newman house. That's a really big house. They bought it intentionally because they want a family, and they'd like to have a big family. And if you know what people are looking for in houses today, they're not looking for a house with maybe 1 or 2 bedrooms, maybe even 3, so that they have children all sleeping together. When I grew up, my 2 sisters and I slept in the same bedroom. My 2 brothers shared a bedroom. That's not the kind of housing market that people are looking for today. So some of these bigger homes may actually have value within the city as single-family dwellings, except that so many of them have been so run down, or like this house, which is absolutely beautiful. I have to compliment Mrs. Allen on the way that she's maintained that property. My worry is that once it's sold with these changes and variances, that it will go the way that a lot of other big, beautiful homes in Oneonta have gone. So the price is high enough that I think it's probably preventing people from looking at it as a place to actually live with income from the carriage house. But I really would hate to see that happen, and I'd hate to see another house chopped up into apartments or whatever the next owner might decide to do now that they have it for 3 families. They could come back and say, the house is really big, you could actually put another apartment in there. So could we make it 4? I don't know what's going to happen. I would just hate to continue to see these homes in Oneonta Center City go the way that a lot of them have gone. It's very sad.
Thank you. Ms. Carney, did you have anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I have to echo what Ms. Powell says. And I do feel like Mrs. Allen has been a wonderful steward of the property and a great neighbor. And so I do feel bad, but it's true, living in Center City has been getting harder and harder with all of our neighbor houses getting chopped up and filled with students, and the density issue where, the streets are full of cars and the noise and it just, it's impossible to quantify, and it's impossible, I guess, for you guys to do anything about it because it just keeps happening. But I don't know where you draw the line or if you even can. So I just say, look around Center City a little bit and see the changes that have happened over the years. It's just not as comfortable and beautiful as it used to be. And I guess that's just the way it is. But I would like you to draw the line somewhere or try to carve out a way to save neighborhoods. I do know that there are lots of other factors in play. I realize that. So I don't know what to do. I don't know what the answer is.
Does anybody else have anything else to say in the audience there? Oh. All right, we're going to close the public comment at this time. Steve, Mr. Yearly, Steve, can you tell us a little bit about this property, what you know about it?
The owners pretty much summed it up. It's, according to our paperwork, it's been a single-family home since 2006-ish. It has a carriage house in the back that is not illegally, but it is legally a separate unit. It's all up to date on paperwork. It's a single-family home in a single-family zone that they want to turn into a 2-family house. The applicant stated it. That's basically where we're at. The tax situation, it is on file with the county as a 2-family or as a multi-family house. When we addressed that with the assessor, he isn't sure that would categorically change the taxes. He sent an email.
Is it a multifamily because the carriage house is there, and that's why they consider it a multifamily, or is it the actual house itself is a multifamily?
The house, the parcel is taxed at, or is listed as a code like 230, which is a multifamily house. Because of the carriage house and the pre-existing 2 units. but according to the tax assessor, he's not sure, I'm not certain the change to a single family will result in the assessment being less, as the value will be based on square feet of livable area, not the number of units, and then he kind of just goes into how they address or change those codes. They send out an assessor, or the resident informs the county that's changed. But yeah, I mean, it's a single family home. It was turned into a single family home. It was put on file with us as a single family home. The other kind of weird thing is our code says once you stop using a non-conforming structure for a certain amount of time, it automatically loses that. So what we've kind of seen with some of these other houses is they've been vacant for 5 years and they're in an R2 zone. So then we're like, you can't continue to use them because their zoning non-conforming status has been lost over time. So even if this building was still laid out as a two-family home, it would still be here because the owner filed paperwork saying that it was no longer being used as a two-family home. And hasn't been since I was a senior in college.
Yeah.
Mrs. Allen, can you clarify, will it be a three-family then? The two-family in the main house and then the carriage house as well?
2-family in the main house and one in the carriage
So it's a
house.
three-family?
Yeah.
Yeah, parcel would have 3 units on it.
Mr. Friedman, do you have anything else, any other questions? Yeah.
Well, it's only that there's a distinction to be made between houses that were once two-family and houses that were never two-family. So we've had this situation a few times in the past with that place on Elm Street. And the burden that you have to meet to get the variance has to do with neighborhood character is one thing, which I think we as a board have to determine what neighborhood character means in this situation. But it also, the decision of this board is also based on a showing of, I think it's still called financial hardship associated with the property. And we would need to hear that showing in order to be able to approve this.
Do you have any comment on those questions?
Well, I have a comment on another issue here, and that is the anonymity of the buyer. And as we saw on a property recently on Elm Street, we knew who the buyer was. Oh, well, he owned it, but it had been a two-family. We knew who it was, and he had a terrible track record of maintaining property. And I'd hate to be in a position of approving something without some kind of a commitment from the purchaser as to what his real plans were. You know, does he want to put 3 students in each apartment? Does he want to have it as a short-term rental in the summer? Which I believe, if he bought it and made it a two-family, he would have a right to ask permission, wouldn't he?
He would have to file his own variance.
Yeah.
Anyone who purchased this house, it's still in the R2 zone. It would still require a variance.
But what if he lived in the carriage house?
Yeah, so if this house was a full-time resident for whoever owned it, they could use it for short-term rental. As long as it's occupied by the owner 279 days a year.
So the scope of the change is not clear for us because we don't know anything. We have nothing from the purchaser as to what his intentions are. And it seems to me we could ask for that information through you.
Yeah. And I think you could too. I just didn't know how I was supposed to proceed with that, whether I was supposed to keep it confidential. The buyer lives in Palm Springs, California, and has some kind of a connection to Oneonta with a sister.
Other than the house being large, how can we determine that this particular property, the home was actually, and still is, and sits as a two-family?
Well,
I mean, besides there being two furnaces, I mean, you said that.
yeah,
I mean, is there fire separation, is there walls, is there separate entrances for the two apartments? I mean, those are the things that, kind of the information that would be really great. A layout would be really great to see. I haven't seen one in here really. I mean, if we were able to see that, it kind of goes towards the value of the home being a two-family home, you know, and instead of somebody who wants to buy a large home and wants to turn it into, you know, a two-family home. So I don't see any of that stuff here today. And I think that that's kind of what Peter's alluding to. We don't have like a necessary floor plan of the actual house as it sits, future plans, all of that kind of stuff. And to go
well,
along
I have plans for the house, and you know, I actually had Alton View architects in Cooperstown draw up plans for taking the house back to two-family. I mean, we kind of brought it to one family, and then, you know, the grandkids came and all that kind of stuff, and then realized that when it really got down to it, that we could live in half the house. So we had plans made up, but just, my husband passed away before any of that transpired, so just never did anything with it. But I do have a set of plans, you know, if you want to see outlines or things like that.
Jeff, do you have any questions? Yeah.
Currently, it's a single-family house.
Yes.
Because it's on the market, it is more favorable to attempt to turn it back to a two-family house. The difficulty I'm having, if we look at zoning and we look at the requirements, it has lost its status of a two-family house and has gone to a single-family house. If it is being converted back to a two-family just for financial gain or ease of sale, I personally have difficulty with that.
Well,
Unless there's a-
but I had represented it as a multifamily because I thought it was a three-family structure. And so when, you know, when I told the realtors, so, but this guy obviously went on the website and saw that it wasn't, so, and that's why when he made his offer, it was contingent upon it being rezoned as a three-family.
Has there been interest as a single-family house in the market?
Not at all. It's been on the market for a year, and I've only had people look at it who wanted it as a multifamily.
Mr. Chair, I have conflicting issues on this. If the city is going to give a directive on what they want, only part of that solution is through zoning. They have to kind of come up with a mission statement on what they want the city to be. You take a large house like this, very difficult to find a single family who has interest at that dollar value to say we're moving to Oneonta. Therefore, that puts the hardship on the individual who owns the house without true commitment from the city on what they're really looking for. I agree that if we look at the division of Walnut Street, we see what's happening there. It seems like these cases come to the ZBA because of conflict with the zoning. But yet we have conflict within the system itself that's creating an environment that looks beneficial for student housing and multiple housing. It detracts from the single-family structure. And we leave the individual property owner at the burden of continuing to pay the expenses while the city tries to figure out what they want. That's kind of unfair to the property owner. You know,
I say something about, in my time on the council, which is coming up in almost 8 years, there's never been any request, complaints about the council needs to do something about this. It's never been referenced, as many other committees do, about something it would like to see the council consider. So I'd only put that in. It's not a derelict council, it's just never really come up, except for the notion of perhaps doing an entire rezoning of the entire city, which would probably take at least a year. So if there's a request to go to the council about considering something like this, it's a tension between the rights and the responsibilities of the zoning board, and if you need more guidance from the council to make a decision, please come to the council on that.
I think Mr. May, the prior chair, has brought that.
I have been on the city council now for almost 8 years, and has never been any statement, except I've heard it, I've also been in the zoning board, never been any request made, and I've made this statement before in this meeting, that if the zoning board wants to have some consideration for the council to do this, please come to the council to talk about the need for that. Or I don't know if it's a need for that, but you request for clarification of the council, because the zoning board does the zoning, the council would.
I'm just gonna interject here real
Yeah.
quick, so I attend like every public meeting the city has, basically. Maybe I made Carrie, maybe the clerk's office beats me on that, but I don't know. We just rezoned basically the entire downtown, where we brought in parcels that previously were in the R2 into the downtown zone to address some of these problems with these types of properties. So now the AB1 zone runs all the way to the backside of Walnut Street and almost grabs Linda's property on the Maple Street side. She's like 2 parcels up. It's like Robin Wood and hers are outside of that zone. If we look at like what the Housing Commission has kind of said, and we look at what passed, the reason we have this zoning code is because the city determined through a legislative process that protecting single-family homes was why we made an R2 zone, why we covered 68% of the city and single-family homes. So the argument that the city's legislative body didn't send a clear message on our zoning would be in fact not correct, because in 2013, we zoned 60-something% of the city as single-family homes, including the neighborhood that 15 Maple's at. The fact that there's a large number of non-conforming parcels, uses, etc. in those zones was kind of overlooked when we rezoned and drew up these boundaries, because we were like, we want single-family homes, so that's what we did. There have been thoughts about introducing 1, 2, and 3 family homes into other districts, like other zoning districts that are not currently, that do not currently permit those uses. There's, I mean, we haven't had any like major political push to see that happen. So I think that's something you have to consider, like, is the city looking to maintain single-family homes like we were in 2013? Or are we looking to expand 1, 2, and 3 family homes in all the zoning districts? So that's not something that like you're gonna solve at a zoning board meeting. That's something that you have to say, maybe the Housing Commission brings that up, or maybe City Council reviews that. Because that's kind of where a lot of places are going. Like you look in like Minnesota, they've actually written off single-family zoning. Like it's not even a permitted, can't do it. So there are states, including New York State, that are moving more towards that single-family zoning is not an option. So that's kind of on the horizon. But right now, most of the city is zoned single-family, including this neighborhood.
So, one of the things we're always torn with is when there's a request to have other apartments or increases in apartments. We never know, and we can never direct a property owner not to put students in.
Right.
So there's very few people that would mind a two-family house next to them with families or adults in them.
Right.
But we've gotten such a reputation, or students have gotten such a reputation, nobody wants to live near students anymore. So that's one issue, but another issue that's, I think, related to this is the zoning board only hears the applications that we get, which are not necessarily telling about the demand for converting single-family homes to more apartments or two-family homes to more apartments. And so I have a question for you about what we did in 2011 when we rezoned Washington and Columbia and I think Academy, Watkins and Grove to allow them to have a much higher density of numbers of apartments in each existing building. Has there been much play on that? Have there been many new apartments made in those areas?
So, I think the problem you start to run into is the desirability of Center City is approximately, because of its large houses close to the school. So in some of those zones, yeah, there've been units added, but like, they're not, a lot of those houses aren't big enough. They're not a 4,000 square foot house, they're like 1,800 square feet, like you can maybe make 2 units of. You're not seeing like a 4,000 square foot house on Columbia that is getting turned into like a multifamily house. Like, I think a lot of those houses are already built out. A house like this, like 62 Elm Street, you know, it's like a 4,000 square foot house, like, there's interest in making those into multifamilies because they're in Center City, so they're close to the school, and they're big enough to put, 4 units into.
So you're talking about units for students again, because it's close to the school.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying specifically students, but I think, like, if we're all honest, like, we see that in Center City a lot. I mean, we see a lot of student rental.
Do we see much conversion of any buildings to apartments, additional apartments for non-students? Like a 1,500 square foot single-family house converted to 2 apartments for professionals or anything?
Is it outside of on Columbia, and my landlord doesn't rent to students?
Yeah, so like, there are some that are that way. I guess the more telling thing is I've never had someone come to me and say, hey, I want to convert my multi-family house into a single-family home. So like, we don't see those. I think like Chip Holmes is like the only guy I've had knowingly come in and file I'm turning my multifamily into a single-family. So more telling, I think, than adding units is I'm not seeing anyone coming and reducing units. And I'm not seeing anyone reducing 6 units to 2 units so they're bigger and they have more bedrooms.
And so I think that's the charge that with the zoning code that was laid out in 2000, reaffirmed in 2013 to protect these particular zones and not necessarily change them back into, multifamilies or to encourage, single-family home. That's what we were talking about with the legislative process. So if in particular, we have the charge as a community to create 1,000 new places for people to live with those new people that we're supposed to bring to this community, that's a charge from the, vision from the mayor as well as council, I think. So
Just to clarify that, I don't think the zoning board operates under a challenge for or against. The code is the code.
we're talking about the public, though. We're talking about the challenge that the public has. And they bring those applications to us. I mean, we've gone through the same sort of process with the baseball rentals or the short-term rentals. I mean, I think that's what, I'm not trying to, say what you said, but I kind of feel like the same way in that way.
So you interpreted what I was trying
Yeah,
to say.
yeah.
Thank you.
Ashley, do you have anything to say or any questions for the applicant?
Not really. I kind of agree with Jack, to be honest with you.
Okay. Jerry?
No.
Not good.
Back to what Peter had said, my concern is that, this property is being, you're applying for a variance to have, a multi-unit place, but once you sell the property, that goes with the property, and we just don't know what the next person is going to do, and that's my concern.
Perhaps we can get a commitment from that next person without even identifying them through an attorney or something.
Did we say that that person's no longer interested? They withdrew?
Just is having a personal issue at the moment.
Okay, all right, so it's still potential.
Yes.
So I guess the next question would be, and I'm only asking this kind of like a devil's advocate a little bit, so, in the process of working on zoning code updates, I mean, we saw houses that were in the R2 that came into the AB1 district in our last update. So like, actually Fred Ploutz's property is now in the AB1 district after that rezoning. So there is a possibility that this house could end up becoming, part of a different zoning district that would permit additional units. So the board is charged with approving or denying use variances. However, in the future, if this element change through legislative action, this house could theoretically be a multifamily house. So it's just something to kind of think about.
I see this location, this particular house, as being a place where that would be a really good solution, as well as properties around Fox Hospital, where creating more dwelling units in what are now one-family zones may be really helpful to the nurse housing shortage problem. And I think there are other areas of the city where we could use this word surgically, identify a cluster around the need and just change the zone in those areas without having a major negative effect. I don't think anybody near it would like it, though, if they're living in their own home.
Well, and I think that's what I'm kind of alluding to. You've got the idea that we need to build more units, but you also have a fairly strong disjointed population of people that live in those neighborhoods that also, in full disclosure, my wife would murder me if I championed multifamily housing in our neighborhood. I don't mind that much, but my wife would, move me outside, so. We're even divided, we have our own civil war in our own house over this fact.
Well, I think the problem I've always seen with every zoning board decision is when it seems like it may be precedent setting. And so if you do it in one location for all kinds of significant but hard to understand criteria, why wouldn't you do it everywhere else? And I think it just kind of throws the zoning board and the city into a weak position in looking at these individual things one at a time.
Anybody else? We can get rid of the seeker. The code enforcement has determined that this is an unlisted action under seeker and that seek has been filed. I'd like to affirm that with a motion, if somebody can make a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Yeah.
Chair Taylor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Montague? Yes. Commissioner Beck?
Yes.
Commissioner Friedman?
Yes.
Commissioner Allen?
Yes.
Commissioner Dunn?
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly?
Yes.
From some polling on the board, I see, a little bit of an issue on both sides here for this particular property. I know that if there was a floor plan and there was some, some things laid out, it might make a difference. I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if that would change anybody's particular decision on this. Is anybody prepared to make any type of motion towards this applicant?
I would look at it as being an opportunity to review, possibly table the decision until more information is gotten. We now have a conflict in concept as opposed to zoning. The Common Council is now aware of the issues that we're targeted with. So perhaps we could ask that that be moved for conversation.
What type of additional information would you think the applicant should bring?
I think we should look at possible drawings, some information from the potential owner on intent.
Okay.
However, the difficulty with that is once the variance is issued, it can go to a different owner.
Absolutely.
And it carries with property.
So that'll all be weighted as well. Anybody else, anything else you'd like to see?
What Jeff said was, I guess, with a future owner having that commitment, from them just to see what their objectives are really going to be. You're saying it's going to be a 3-family, it's going to be turning this into a 4 or 5-family. A house is quite large. And I don't know how many egresses there are and how many possibilities there are. And obviously you had someone that drew up plans for you, but with your vision of the house, maybe,
Yes.
If it's a 3-family plot and you've got one in the carriage house, then they can only put 2
That's correct.
in the house. So it doesn't end up being a multi.
It's a very large home. I mean, how many square feet home is it, you say?
Probably 3,500.
Okay. So is that what the consensus is potentially to table this until we get that additional information?
I agree with that.
Do you understand that?
I think so. What additional?
I think it's kind of hard that we don't have, what the house was, like, you're asking us to revert it back to what it was, let's say, right? Is that what you're asking us to do
No,
today?
I think what I was asking is that it just become a 3-family so that then the new owner would present to you his plans for making 2 units out of the house.
I don't think the board at this time is comfortable to do that. And we're giving you an opportunity to show to us how it's going to be reverted back. I think that's
Okay.
what we're looking for.
All right, well,
There's value in that property, obviously, as a multifamily property, and that's why I was asking some of those questions about, the double furnaces and, where the electric, is there 2 service panels there? Is there 2 electrical panels there? There's all those things that you may or may not know right now that you could bring as evidence towards us to show us that this particular property didn't go all the way back to a single-family home.
okay.
Okay, Jeff, that's the motion that you're making to table this to the next meeting. Would that be enough time for you to come to the next meeting with that information, which would be held in June? June 22nd. June 22nd.
June 22nd, okay.
Can I get a second for that, please?
So moved. Chair DeMaio?
Yes.
Vice Chair McKenty? Yes. Commissioner Beck?
Yes.
Commissioner Friedland?
Yes.
Commissioner Allen? Commissioner Goss?
Yes.
Commissioner Toth?
Yes.
Do we have the information that we need on the financial hardship?
I was going to ask that. I mean, there might be some additional information that you add towards the, financial hardship that you're having, specifically because of the opportunity to sell this property and getting the value out of the property that you need to get.
Okay. All right.
I mean, it's just presenting a case to us, with a full application, and I think that that's what the board is looking for.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Motion to